A piece of fish on your plate is supposed to be one thing. Fish. Caught, cleaned, sold, that's it. It is not the fillet sitting in your supermarket case, wrapped in plastic, labeled wild, labeled fresh, labeled Atlantic. Might not be the fish on the label at all. It might be a cheaper species. It might be farmed and called wild. It might have been frozen, thawed, and sold to you as fresh at twice the price. And in some cases, it carries levels of mercury that the government itself warns pregnant women never to touch. Americans spend over $100 billion a year on seafood. We eat about 20 pounds of it per person every single year. And here is the number that should stop you cold. In one of the largest investigations ever done, the ocean advocacy group Oceana tested seafood across the country and found that roughly 1 in 3 samples was mislabeled. 1 in 3. Some studies in individual cities ran far higher than that. That is not a rounding error. That is not a mix-up at the counter. That is a system. But not every fish is guilty, and not every brand at that counter is lying to you. I spent over 40 hours auditing the seafood case. I read the fine print on the packaging. I went through federal mercury data, lab studies, court cases, and import records. I cross-checked species names, sourcing claims, and country of origin. And the results were not what I expected. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which fish to leave in the case and which ones are actually worth bringing home. Only 6 of the 23 I looked at came out clean. Let me show you why. Before we get into the specific fish, you need to understand the loophole, because without it, none of this makes sense. Here is how seafood is supposed to reach you. A fish is caught in a specific place by a specific method. It is identified by species. It is logged, iced, shipped cold, and sold under its real name. A wild sockeye salmon is a wild sockeye salmon from the moment it leaves the water to the moment it hits your pan. Simple. Honest. Traceable. Now here is the math that changed the industry. Some fish are expensive to catch and slow to bring to market. Wild snapper, fresh wild salmon, real Gulf grouper, they cost money, they are seasonal, supply goes up and down. Meanwhile, certain other fish are dirt cheap. Farmed tilapia, imported catfish raised in crowded ponds, escalar, a fish so oily it can make people sick that costs almost nothing to import. So somewhere along a supply chain that can pass through 5 or 6 different hands before it reaches your store, the cheap fish gets relabeled as the expensive fish. A $2 fillet becomes a $10 fillet with one printed sticker. The fraud doesn't even have to happen at your supermarket. It can happen at the distributor, the processor, the importer. By the time it reaches the case, the lie is already baked in, and the store may not even know. That is the first trick. Species swapping. The second trick is the words on the label, and this is where it gets legal. Words like fresh, natural, and even wild are far weaker than you think. Fish labeled fresh has often been previously frozen and thawed, and in many cases that is perfectly legal as long as it was not frozen below a certain point or it is disclosed in tiny print. The word natural means almost nothing on seafood. And country of origin labeling, the law that is supposed to tell you where your fish came from, has gaping holes. Once a fish is processed, breaded, or turned into a value-added product, the origin rules can fall away entirely. The third piece is something the label will almost never warn you about clearly. Mercury. Certain large, long-lived predator fish accumulate methylmercury in their flesh over their lifetime. The bigger and older the fish, the more it carries. The Food and Drug Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency publish a joint advisory listing fish that pregnant women, nursing mothers, and young children should avoid completely. Most shoppers have never read it. The fish on that avoid list are sitting in the case right now with no warning label at all, and the fourth piece is the additive. A lot of fish, especially frozen and previously frozen fillets, are treated with a chemical called sodium tripolyphosphate, and sometimes with carbon monoxide gas. The phosphates make the fish absorb and hold water, so you pay fish prices for added water weight. The carbon monoxide locks in a bright red or pink color, so a fish that is old and gray looks fresh and rosy. Both are legal, both are common. Most people have no idea they are eating them. That is the loophole. Cheap fish wearing an expensive name. Weak words that imply quality they do not guarantee. Mercury with no warning, and water and gas sold to you by the pound. All of it operating for the most part completely within the law. Now, before we get into the specific fish you should be skipping, let me tell you about a resource that goes even deeper than this video. Everything I have covered here, the species swaps, the mercury tiers, the additive red flags, the certification marks that actually mean something is documented in full in my digital books, the label audit, the ingredient standard, and the complete pantry field edition available together for $97 at mislabeled.com. Link in the description. These are the field guides I wished existed when I started this work, page by page, category by category. So you can walk into any store and read every aisle the same way you are learning to read the seafood case right now. Now let's get into the fish. I'm telling you to skip because the loophole we just covered is exactly how these frauds are built. Skip 1. Imported farm tilapia sold as a healthy white fish. Tilapia is everywhere because it is cheap, mild, and easy. The marketing leans hard on the word lean. And tilapia is not dangerous. Let me be clear about that. It will not hurt you. But here is the problem. A huge share of the tilapia sold in the United States is imported and farm-raised, much of it from crowded overseas ponds where feed quality and water quality vary enormously. Flip the package and read the country of origin. When you see imported farm-raised tilapia with no further detail, you are buying the cheapest protein in the entire case dressed up as a health food. Independent testing over the years has repeatedly flagged tilapia as one of the most commonly substituted and lowest value fish on the market. It is not poison. It is just rarely what the wholesome packaging implies, and it is one of the most heavily farmed and least transparent fish you can buy. Skip 2. Generic frozen fish fillets treated with phosphates. Pick up a bag of frozen white fish fillets, the cheap kind, and flip it over. Read the ingredient list. A fish fillet should have one ingredient: fish. But on a lot of these bags, you will see fish, then water, then sodium triple-iphosphate, sometimes salt, sometimes more. That is the tell. The phosphate is there to make the flesh hold water. Studies and industry data have shown that treated fillets can absorb a significant percentage of their weight in added water. So when you cook it, it weeps liquid into the pan, shrinks, and steams instead of searing. You paid by the pound for water and a chemical that helped the fish hold that water. That is not a fillet. That is a sponge with a fish label. Skip 3. Atlantic cod and snapper sold loose at a suspiciously low price. Here is where the species swap bites hardest. Snapper is one of the single most mislabeled fish in America. In multiple investigations, the majority of fish sold as red snapper was not red snapper at all. It was tilapia, rockfish, tilefish, or other cheaper species wearing the snapper name. And here is the part that turns a wallet problem into a health problem. Some of the fish substituted for snapper have included tilefish, which sits on the federal do not eat list for sensitive groups because of its high mercury content. So you think you are buying a moderate mercury fish, and you may actually be eating a high mercury one. Read the back, not the front. If a fillet is labeled simply snapper or simply cod with no species detail and no origin, and the price is far below everything around it, be skeptical. That bargain may be a different animal entirely. Skip 4. Imported swai and basa marketed as catfish or sold under vague names. Swai and basa are farmed in Southeast Asia, often in enormous river pond operations. They are extremely cheap, which is exactly why they get relabeled. Federal investigations and import alerts have repeatedly flagged imported swai and basa for being sold under the more familiar and more trusted name catfish, and for arriving with residues of substances not approved for use in food fish in the United States. The Food and Drug Administration has issued import refusals on shipments of this category of fish over contamination concerns. Flip the package. If you see swai, basa, pangasius, or just generic white fish from an overseas source with no clear standards listed, you are buying one of the least regulated, most substituted fish on the shelf. Again, not certain doom on a single plate, but it is the opposite of what the clean white packaging suggests. Skip 5. King mackerel, swordfish, and tilefish from the high mercury group. This one is not about fraud. This one is about a warning the label will not give you. The federal advisory from the Food and Drug Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency names a specific group of fish to avoid entirely if you are pregnant, nursing, or feeding young children. King mackerel, swordfish, tilefish from the Gulf of Mexico, shark, marlin, orange roughy, big-eye tuna. These are large, long-lived predators, and they carry the highest methylmercury loads in the case. Methylmercury is a neurotoxin. For a developing baby, the science here is not fringe. It is the official government position. And yet these fish sit in the premium part of the counter with no warning sticker, often marketed as a luxury, an indulgence, a special occasion fish. It can be a special occasion fish for a healthy adult in moderation, but for the people the advisory protects, it belongs on the do not buy list, and almost nobody tells them that at the counter. Skip 6. And this is the one with the federal case behind it. Escalar sold as white tuna or super white tuna. Escalar is a fish with a nickname. People in the trade sometimes call it the laxative fish or the X-lax fish. Here is why. Escalar contains a waxy ester called gempilotoxin that the human body cannot digest. Eat too much of it, and it can cause an unpleasant and sometimes severe digestive reaction. Some countries have restricted or banned its sale outright for this reason. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration has advised against selling it, but it still moves through the market, and here is the trick. It is frequently relabeled. Investigations have found escalar sold as white tuna, super white tuna, or even just tuna, especially in the sushi and frozen markets. So a customer orders what they think is a clean piece of tuna, and they get a fish that some governments will not even allow on shelves. That is not a labeling oversight. That is a swap that can land you in the bathroom for a day. Flip the package, and if you see white tuna or super white tuna with no species name like albacore, ask exactly what it is. That vague name is the tell. Now let me say the thing I always say, because it matters. Organic does not mean traceable. Premium pricing does not mean it is the species on the label. And fresh does not mean it was never frozen. The fancy paper wrap, the chalkboard sign, the warm lighting over the case, none of that is regulated. The species name, the origin, and the ingredient list on the back. That is the only thing that has to tell you the truth, and even that has holes. So how do you protect yourself without a marine biology degree? You do not need a laboratory to test your fish. You need your eyes, your nose, and about 60 seconds of label reading. Here are the tests. Test 1, the ingredient count and the flip. Real fish has 1 ingredient. Fish. Turn the package over and read the back, not the front. If the ingredient list says anything beyond the fish itself, plus maybe salt, stop. If you see water, sodium tripolyphosphate, sodium phosphate, or treated to retain moisture, you are buying added water and a chemical binder. And look for 2 specific words near the origin. Previously frozen. If a fillet is labeled fresh in big letters on the front and previously frozen in small letters on the back, you now know the front of that package was selling you a feeling, not a fact. Test 2, the price and species sanity check. Learn the 3 or 4 fish that get faked the most. Snapper, grouper, white tuna, wild salmon. If one of those is priced far below everything else in the case, your skepticism should go up, not your excitement. Real wild snapper and real wild Gulf grouper are expensive because they are hard to catch. A cheap fillet wearing one of those names is the single biggest red flag in the entire department, and demand the species, not just tuna, but albacore or yellowfin. Not just snapper, but the actual species. Not just salmon, but sockeye, coho, or king, and wild or farmed. A counter that cannot or will not tell you the exact species is a counter you cannot trust. Test 3, the look and smell test, and the salmon color test. Fresh fish should smell like clean ocean water and almost nothing else. A strong, fishy, sour, or ammonia smell means it is old, no matter how pink it looks. And here is the salmon trick specifically. Wild salmon flesh varies, but it tends to be deep, slightly uneven in color, with thinner white fat lines. A lot of farm salmon is fed pigment to turn its naturally gray flesh that uniform, intense, almost neon orange. If a fillet labeled wild has perfectly even, fat marbled, candy-colored flesh, you may be looking at farmed fish wearing a wild label. The Oceania studies found salmon labeling fraud was especially common in restaurants and out of season when wild simply is not available and you are being sold farmed at wild prices. Run those 3 tests, and most of the fraud in the case falls apart in under a minute. Engineered, treated, and mislabeled fish gives itself away. The real thing has nothing to hide. So now, let me show you the fish that earned a place in your cart. The Clean 6. Real one. Wild Alaskan salmon, sockeye especially. Alaska built its reputation on doing this right. Wild Alaskan salmon, and sockeye in particular, is one of the most tightly managed and best documented fisheries in the world. The state of Alaska wrote sustainable fishing into its constitution. When you buy genuine wild Alaskan sockeye, ideally with the Marine Stewardship Council certification on the package, you are getting a fish with a real paper trail. The ingredient list is one word: salmon. The flesh is deep red because of its natural diet, not because of added feed pigment. And nutritionally, it is a powerhouse, rich in omega-3 fatty acids and protein, and it sits low on the mercury list. Look for sockeye salmon, wild caught, product of the United States, Alaska. That label is doing its job. Real 2, canned and pouched wild salmon and skipjack light tuna. Here is the value play that almost nobody talks about. Canned wild salmon and canned light tuna made from skipjack are 2 of the safest, cheapest, most honest seafood buys in the entire store. Skipjack, the fish in most canned light tuna, is small and short-lived, which means it carries far less mercury than the big albacore in white tuna and far less than the predators on the avoid list. The federal advisory actually lists light tuna in the best choices group. Flip the can. You want fish, water, or olive oil, and salt. That's it. A can of wild pink or sockeye salmon gives you the same omega-3s as the fresh fillet, including soft, edible bones packed with calcium for a fraction of the price. This is the fish that proves the point. Doing it right does not have to cost more. Sometimes the honest choice is the cheapest thing on the shelf. Real 3. Farmed rainbow trout from United States freshwater farms. I told you farmed was a warning word, and most of the time it is. But here is the exception that proves you have to read carefully instead of reacting to a single word. United States farmed rainbow trout is consistently ranked as one of the best and most responsibly farmed fish in the country by independent sustainability programs. It is raised in clean freshwater systems with good oversight. It is low in mercury, and it is high in omega-3s. It tastes like a milder, more delicate salmon. Flip the package. You are looking for rainbow trout farm-raised in the United States. That specific combination is not the same beast as imported pond fish. Same word, completely different fish. That is exactly why you read the whole label and not just the scary word. Real 4. Atlantic and Pacific farmed mussels, oysters, and other shellfish. This one surprises people, so stay with me. Farm shellfish are among the cleanest, greenest, and safest seafood you can possibly buy. Mussels, oysters, and clams are filter feeders. They do not need to be fed wild fish. They actually clean the water they grow in, and they sit at the very bottom of the food chain, which means almost no mercury accumulation. Sustainability programs rank farmed mussels and oysters at the top of their best choice lists. They are protein dense, mineral rich, and absurdly cheap per pound compared to a fancy fillet. When you buy a bag of farmed mussels, you are getting one of the most honest deals in the whole department. The ocean did the work, and there is no label trick to hide behind. Real 5. Wild-caught Pacific sardines and other small, oily fish. Sardines have an image problem they do not deserve. Here is the truth. Small, oily, short-lived fish like sardines and anchovies are nutritional gold, and they are about as low risk as seafood gets. Because they are small and live fast, they barely accumulate mercury, they are loaded with omega-3 fats, calcium from those soft little bones, and protein. They are wild-caught, rarely faked, because nobody is relabeling a cheap fish as sardines, and a tin costs a couple of dollars. Flip the tin, sardines, water or olive oil, salt, clean. This is real, traceable, sustainable fish that has been feeding people honestly for over 100 years, and the marketing world ignores it precisely because there is no expensive lie to sell on top of it. Real 6. And this is the one I want you to remember. Certified, species verified, wild Pacific cod and Alaska pollock. When the species swap is the whole game, certification is your defense. Wild Alaska pollock and Pacific cod, when they carry the Marine Stewardship Council blue check and a clear product of the United States Alaska origin, are some of the most rigorously managed and accurately labeled white fish in the world. Alaska pollock is the fish in a lot of honestly made fish products. It is low in mercury, high in protein, and the fishery is genuinely well run. This is the everyday white fish that the cheap, phosphate-soaked, mislabeled fillets are pretending to be. Flip the package, find the certification, find the United States Alaska origin, and you have cut through nearly the entire scam in a single label. Real white fish, real name, real place. That is what the fakes are imitating, and now you can buy the original instead. So let me put the whole thing back together because the pattern is the point. They swapped the expensive fish for the cheap one and kept the expensive name. They replaced fresh with previously frozen and printed the word fresh anyway. They replaced fish with fish plus water plus phosphate and sold you the water by the pound. They hid the mercury behind premium packaging and let the government advisory gather dust where you would never see it. They took a fish some countries will not even sell and called it white tuna. None of it was an accident. All of it was a strategy dressed up in clean white paper and soft lighting over a refrigerated case. But now you know the playbook. You know the species that get faked. Snapper, grouper, white tuna, wild salmon, you know the avoid list. King mackerel, swordfish, tilefish, shark, marlin. You know the words that mean nothing and the words that matter. You know the 3 tests. Read the ingredient list and look for previously frozen. Check the price against the species and demand the exact name. Smell it, look at it, and question candy-colored salmon. And you know the 6 that earned your trust. Wild Alaskan sockeye, canned wild salmon, and skipjack light tuna. United States rainbow trout. Farmed mussels and oysters. Wild sardines, and certified wild Alaska pollock and Pacific cod. This is not an argument that the sky is falling, or that you should be afraid of the ocean on your plate. Fish is one of the best foods you can eat, and most of it will not hurt you. But you are spending real money, and in the case of mercury and escolar, you are making real decisions about your body and your family. You deserve to know whether the fish on the label is the fish in the package. You deserve to know where it came from and what was added to it. Your health is not a commodity for a supply chain to optimize, and your grocery budget deserves better than paying snapper prices for tilapia or fish prices for water and gas. If this video helped you see the seafood case differently, subscribe. We audit the food industry so you do not have to hit the bell so you never miss the next investigation, because the next time you walk up to that counter, you will not be guessing. You will be reading. And if you have ever caught a fish at the store that turned out to be something else entirely, tell me about it in the comments, because the more we share, the harder it gets for anyone to fool us. Flip the package, read the back, ask for the species, because you have the right to know the truth about what is really on your plate.